Howdy folks, it's Chris here with Zone Zero California, and this video I'm over here at the edge of Studio City, again on Ventura Boulevard. I've been making my way east, southeast, down Ventura Boulevard just to illustrate where the line of demarcation is for the very high fire hazard severity zone. And Ventura Boulevard is pretty much where it begins for this portion of Los Angeles. Now, if you go west, southwest from Ventura Boulevard, you get into the hills, into the neighborhoods of Sherman Oaks, into the neighborhoods of Studio City here, and eventually you're up in the hills and over down into Hollywood and West Hollywood. On this valley side here, Ventura Boulevard is pretty much the best landmark I can use to show and illustrate exactly where these very high fire hazard severity zones begin. And you know, that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to raise awareness among homeowners, property managers here in Los Angeles and throughout California, and just show viewers and take you on the ground to show you where these zones are and how many people they affect. Because there's a lot of people who would never think that Ventura Boulevard is a very high fire hazard severity zone. It's one of the most at-risk places for fires, according to the CAL FIRE. And that's of course what I'm using to make these videos. I'm looking at the map and I'm picking purposefully intersections, roads, neighborhoods that are easily identifiable. If you live around the area, you've been to LA, you know Ventura Boulevard is one of those famous streets, right? A lot of cool stuff, a lot of great restaurants. And it'll take you pretty much from Studio City here in Hollywood, well, you know, on the backside of Hollywood, all the way to, you know, Sherman Oaks, Encino, Tarzana, Calabasas. You know, it goes for miles, and a lot of people use this. There's a lot of restaurants here, so this is the perfect kind of place for me to make a video like this, just to show and demonstrate exactly where the fire hazard severity zones are and who's most at risk. So if you live off of Ventura Boulevard in the hills of Sherman Oaks or Studio City, you're in one of the most high risk places. And what does this have to do with Zone Zero? Zone Zero is the set of regulations around the 0 to 5 feet around any property or structure when it comes to combustible materials and building materials. And so if you live in one of these very high fire hazard severity zones, you are probably going to experience, if you haven't already, the enforcement of these regulations first. And if you are not in one of these areas, but nonetheless learning about this for the first time, hearing about Zone Zero for the first time, doing your research, by 2028 or 2029, we do expect that every single property and building and home in California is going to need to meet these Zone Zero requirements. They're just starting with the most at-risk places first, hence these very high fire hazard severity zones. So let's talk about what that looks like, all right? So obviously it means no storing of combustible materials in and around your property within that 0 to 5 feet. Can't have your firewood stacked up next to your house. You can't keep, you know, spare gasoline or tanks, you know, gas cans close to your house. You also have to be aware of the kind of patio furniture you have. And speaking of patio furniture, what material is your deck made out of? All right, if your deck is made out of hardwood, maybe cedar, you're going to need to replace that. And that's where the Zone Zero regulations really show the direction and the heavy-handedness and what's at stake. It is going to require, for some folks, for a lot of folks, for almost everyone, a re-examining of the building materials in and around your property in the 0 to 5 feet around your home or your structure. So what else does that look like? It looks like your landscaping. Many homes have trees next to them to provide shade. That could be at risk. They may come in and enforce it in a way where you have to replace those trees or remove them altogether. And so that's actually where some of the most heaviest pushback has been from the community, from people during this regulatory process. It's been around the landscaping issue because in places like Los Angeles and San Diego, for example, people rely on the landscaping to provide that extra shade, you know, and not to mention just improve the quality of life, you know, on their property. So what else does it look like? It might look like replacing your mulch or your wood chips, right, with gravel and things like this. You know, you might need to replace certain types of plants with other types of plants. So those are the kinds of things that are coming. So what else does this include? Well, I alluded to it earlier. I mentioned patios. So let's talk about decks. If your deck is made of redwood, you will have to change that. Now, it doesn't mean you have to go full composite, full plastic, whatever you want to call it, right? Like Trex or TimberTech. I learned last week from a fence contractor, believe it or not, that there are certain hardwoods CAL FIRE themselves have approved for building. One of these hardwoods I know for sure is Kayu Batu. So you can look at replacing your redwood with certain types of hardwoods. Now, I mentioned talking to a fence contractor. Let's talk about fences and gates next. Fences and gates almost always abut the side of your house or your garage. If you have an old redwood fence or gate that does this, you may probably have to replace that. If you have a fence you share with your neighbor and you and your neighbors are pretty close, again, this is why you're going to see statewide guidance from the top and then local jurisdictions from the county and city levels as they go down, kind of being more and more specific, because in places like Los Angeles or San Diego, the homes are built closer together, right? So that's going to affect this decision making and the implementation of this. So, you know, if you have a fence and you and your neighbor are close together, maybe the both of you can look at splitting the cost of replacing that fence. But again, if it's old redwood, guarantee you're going to probably have to replace that, and you're going to have to do it sooner rather than later. That goes for cedar as well. And you're most likely going to be looking at hardwoods to replace that with, or steel, wrought iron, things like that, right? Of course, the name of the game here is Class A non-combustible. And as these regulations come into effect, I think you're going to see more different types of materials come to the market. So, you know, it's evolving. Again, Ventura Boulevard, if you can't already tell here, this is one of the most busiest streets. And now this is the middle, quite literally, of a fire hazard severity zone, in the middle of the very high fire hazard severity zone. This is one of the most dangerous places to be. So again, that's why I choose these areas, these locations, these streets to be easily identifiable landmarks for those of you in LA, to give you an idea of just who's at stake and what needs to be done. So to round it out, we're also going to be mentioning siding and roofing as the other components of what's known as a fire hardening system when it comes to these building materials. And so I encourage you now, go take a look at your home, do a walk around. What do you think is, identify it early, right? What do you think is going to need to be replaced now? What do you think is going to need to be replaced in the future? I think fences, gates, and decks and their landscaping are more immediate. I think siding is a much heavier, bigger, more expensive undertaking. But nevertheless, just be prepared now. That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to raise that awareness now. So I've got two resources for you here. Of course, I've got our school community. It's absolutely free to join. Come join the conversation. Share your horror stories. Share your experience. Share your tales of dealing with insurance or dealing with local governments or state regulatory agencies already, because many people already have. And of course, I have zonezerocalifornia.com. I've got more information there, and that's really a place for you to be able to get in touch with local qualified contractors in your area who we're going to prioritize working with, those that are on the approved vendor list for the Fire Safe Council's published list of vendors. All right, so once again, my name's Chris, Zone Zero California here. What I usually do at the end of these videos is I just take a quick drive through the neighborhood with the GoPro to kind of point out the kinds of fences, gates, and landscaping, siding, decks. It's sometimes hard to see decks from the front yard. Just to give you an idea of the kinds of things we're talking about and the scope, just how many homes and properties and people are going to be affected by this, all right? So thanks again, guys. We'll see you in the next one. Let's take a drive around and see what we find.